Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Davis, and you are watching season 3 of Conversations in Pop Culture, brought to you by my sponsors, Mixum Printing, the smarter way to print. I know printing your creative project can be confusing and stressful, but Mixum is here to make it easy. From their instant quote calculator that lets you get as many quotes as you want for free, to their 24-hour customer service support, Mixum is here to make sure your printing experience runs smoothly from start to finish. And right now, you can choose from a range of premium printing options and materials. And the company has also printed so many successful Kickstarter campaigns. A bunch of them you've even heard about on this very show. And they currently offer services in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the UK, and Mixum can print and reach your audience anywhere in the world. So if you're ready to print smarter, not harder, head over to Mixum.com. And right now, listeners of my show can drop my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab of a current order to get a 5% discount on their first order. So that is Mixam.com. Again, type my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab to get a 5% discount on your first order. And without further ado, I have with me comic creator Steve Tanner. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back on the show.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff going on with you as of lately because the last time we spoke a lot about Time Bomb Comics and what you got going on, and you currently have a Kickstarter running with Rotten Under the Snow. But before we get into all of that, what is Time Bomb Comics and what type of comics you produce? Because you've been around for about 15 years now.
Yeah, that's right. This is actually our 15th publishing year. So we started in 2007, and we publish kind of the comics we tend to publish. People say that they feel very British. That's more by accident rather than design, I guess, because we're based in the UK. So we tend not to publish things. We don't publish kind of superhero comics. We tend to publish kind of adventure, science fiction, fantasy, those kind of comics, horror comics as well. And people seem to like the kind of stuff we do. It's we tend to kind of do stuff. We don't have released too many titles per year. At the most 6 or 7 titles per year. But we do seem to have a nice sort of following of the titles we do release, which is great. And we're regularly seen at the convention circuit in the UK. And what's been kind of nice over the past couple of weeks is that all the shows have started up again after nothing happening for so long in the UK because of what's been happening with the lockdowns and the virus. So this year, it looks like it's been one of our busiest years, which is great because that ties in with our 15-year anniversary. So it's good to be busy this year.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that because what is the UK scene like with comics? Because I'm in the US, a lot of my audience is in the US, and what is that scene like, especially with the con scene now reopening up?
Well, the con scene in the UK is always very vibrant, but it's also constantly evolving. One of the nice things that I've seen since I've been publishing comics with Time Bomb is the shift in comics becoming more accessible to so many different types of people. I mean, when I first got into comics, and this is back in the 80s, and then started going to conventions in the 80s and 90s, it was very much a boys' club. You go to a con and you'd only really see male kind of creators and fans at the show. It's very unusual to see women creators and fans at these shows, and it was also unusual to see kind of creators who weren't males. And what's been interesting for me is seeing that shift. Um, so now you go to a con in the UK, and it really is a huge kind of melting pot of diversity. And this is genuine diversity. This is not kind of the manufactured diversity. This is real people from all different kind of backgrounds and different cultures, all coming together to enjoy comics and create comics, which is how it should be. And certainly, over the past few years, there were a few shows that I went to, and in my row of tables where I was sat in the respective artist alley, I was the only male creator in that row. All the rest were female creators, which is a great kind of shift. It's great. And what's interesting is the type of comics that have been produced is very, very varied. So there's lots of things happening. There always seems to be something new. And as such, I always find it very exciting because there's always something fresh to discover. So I think we have the comic shops like we have like you have in the States, which still do predominantly sell American imported comics for the most part. In terms of like the newsstands, there's only probably really about half a dozen comics that are regularly published through the traditional newsstands, including 2000 AD, the Beano, which has been around since 1938, and a smattering of other kind of like comics that reprint Marvel and DC titles. A couple of comics have started coming on the newsstand recently. There's a regular magazine, a PUBG magazine, which started coming out over the past 18 months, and they've released a couple of specials. And Time Bomb was involved with the creation of one of those specials. So Time Bomb ended up on the newsstand being as one of those specials because they focused on the comics that we've been producing. But mainly the comics you get, a lot of the indie comics are available through shows, but also through crowdfunding, and mainly Kickstarter. Some people do use Indiegogo in the UK, but it is predominantly Kickstarter that people seem to use here. And that's something, again, which I've seen a big kind of upsurge in the amount of people that actively buy their comics through Kickstarter, and also kind of create their comics by using Kickstarter as a platform to do that. So there's a lot of things happening all the time. It's for such a small country, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and let's kind of even dive into some of that because you have a lot of different comics that have come out that you've done on Kickstarter and a variety of other things. And the first one I want to talk about is Flintlock because that's kind of one of your staples. And it sort of takes place between the 1700s and 1800s, and it follows a variety of characters between sort of princesses and pirates and a variety of other people. So, what is the basic premise for people who don't know what Flintlock is?
I mean, Flintlock it's an anthology series, but it's all set in the 18th century, which is the period you've just described, from the 1700s through to the year 1800. And the idea is to tell adventure stories within confines of that 100 years of history. And obviously, in that 100 years of history, a lot of very familiar kind of adventure tropes were happening because it was the age of piracy, it was the age of the highwayman. There were some monumental kind of things happening in world history in the 1700s. We had the French Revolution taking place. We had the War of Independence, of course. All those things happening within those 100 years. So it's a very rich kind of part of history to kind of explore and tell stories about. So it's a period which I personally find very fascinating. And Flintlock, of all the titles that Time Bomb produced, Flintlock is very much my baby. It's a bit of a passion because it's really conceived as a comic that I wanted to kind of see, and because it wasn't being published at the time, I kind of thought, well, I'll write it. So I wrote all the different stories within Flintlock, but I work with a variety of different artists, and each of the individual stories are set in a different decade in the 18th century. So you have stories set in the 1730s, the 1780s, the 1770s. So they're all separate stories, but it all takes place in a shared timeline, a shared universe, if you like, but much, much smaller because it's just that 100 years of history. So you have kind of stories taking place maybe 5 or 6 decades after another story, which there are links. So some characters may actually kind of meet each other, but in other cases, the kind of links are a lot more subtle. So there might be references just to events or characters from stories that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, within that 100 years of history. And one of the other things I wanted to do with Flintlock, which has made it a little bit different from a lot of the comics that you tend to see, is that all the lead characters, almost all of them, are women. And it's looking then to the real history, because in real history, there were female pirates, there were female highwaymen, there were female samurai. So it's using women as the leads for these types of characters who act and behave like they would have done in the 18th century. And because of that, it seems to have kind of garnered a really strong female readership following, which I think is great. Again, it wasn't something which was intended. It seems to be a happy byproduct of the type of stories that we're telling. And I think a lot of it goes back to the way that the women in the Flintlock stories are presented, because you can see from the covers that they're all presented in a way how they would have looked at the time. So you don't have you don't have the highwayman running around in high heels and skimpy clothing and all that kind of stuff. We don't do all that thing. She dresses exactly how she would have done at that time, and I think that seems to hit a chord as well. It seems to have resonated with a lot of the audience, especially the female audience, who constantly kind of see the way that women are presented in many comics, especially superhero comics and those kind of comics. I think it's almost these kind of like an ideal of what a 14-year-old boy thinks women look like, or how they behave. So it's kind of pushing against that, but still telling good adventure stories and entertaining adventure stories, because that's what it is. It's not about being preachy. It's about telling adventure stories within that setting. And even kind of the fact that the comics are presented in black and white rather than color. That's an intentional thing, because one of the inspirations for Flintlock are the weekly comics that were published in Britain in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and almost all of them were featured mainly in black and white stories, and they had comics that were aimed at boys. They had humor comics that were for both boys and girls, and they had comics that were aimed just for girls, so the weekly girls comics, and then the weekly girls comics in particular always had adventure stories featuring these very strong female kind of characters. So it's a tip of the hat to those kind of comics as well from the past. So all those kind of influences have come together with Flintlock, and I mean it's found an audience, which is great. It's always great when a book finds an audience, especially when it's an indie book.
Books talk about that. So to even talk a little bit about that, what is this like for you? Because you're giving a bunch of people an opportunity to sort of do some really cool books and do a lot of fun stuff. 48 pages, there's like 5 of them out there. And I don't know if everybody can hear that echo, but I don't know if it's on my laptop today. It's being difficult. We're just gonna have to deal with that. Yeah. So we can just switch back to this. It's clearly.
I didn't catch that question because of the echo, I'm afraid.
So what is this like? Really build out the entire thing with Flintlock, and it's 48 pages, and working with a lot of different creators on it. Because that's one of the cool things about that draws me to Flintlock.
I mean, yeah, part of the kind of the fun of it is that you get to work with lots of different artists, which is great. And so some artists have kind of stuck with one particular type of character, but other artists have kind of worked with the different characters within the book, which is great. So I've kind of built up this little kind of pool of Flintlock artists who do the stories. And I think because it's an anthology, the stories. I mean, in each book there's 3 or 4 stories, and I mean the first are 48 pages, but from book 3 onwards, it's 60, 64, 68 pages. So it becomes quite chunky, really. But because the stories themselves, apart from the opening story, the Lady Flintlock story, which is about the highwayman, um, all the other stories tend to be between 6 and maybe 14 pages in length. So it's manageable for different artists to actually do that and work that alongside any existing commitments they might have. So I think that's one of the nice things that has made it easier to work with multiple artists, because it's not as if they're tied to producing 24 pages, 48 pages, 70 or whatever many pages constantly. It has that rotation, and it's just nice to have different art styles, I think. But I think that the artists are chosen because how they handle black and white art. I mean, that's a key thing, because not all artists are kind of right black and white. Because I think that there's a lot of artists are very used to having their work being coloured. So, but when they compose the page, they're aware that there's going to be colouring put on to that page. So the way they draw that page will be a little bit different if they were doing purely black and white art. And I think when we're using artists who are very comfortable with drawing black and white, I think you get a different feel and a different kind of scope to a book that would normally bring in then the talents of a colorist to kind of to work on the line art and take it in a different direction.
Yeah. With anthology, I'm cutting in and out, but so what is that like for you to also have shorter stories and have that working for you? Because it is something that's different.
Well, I think writing shorter stories from a writer is actually more of a challenge. It's actually more difficult to tell a really solid story in 6 pages than it is to tell a story in 24 pages, because the more pages you have, the more kind of flexibility you have. You can take your time more. But when you're writing a shorter story, 4 pages, 5 pages, 6 pages, every panel counts. Every panel has to kind of move the story forward in a way that provides, makes it enjoyable to the reader, provides clear storytelling, but also provides a beginning, a middle, and an end. One thing that I kind of don't really enjoy when I read comics myself, when I get a sense that comics are very decompressed, and I think we tend to have that a lot now, where you have comics which are basically written for the trade. So a story that might really only warrant 2 or 3 issues is expanded to 4, 5, or 6, just so that they meet the page count that's needed for the trade paperback. So I think you can tell that sometimes when you're reading the story, the way it's told, and the structure. So I think sometimes less is more with storytelling. And I think over the years, the comics that have really, really kind of impressed me have been ones which have made full use of the page count. Now, that could be the amount of panels on a page to tell a really engaging story. So, it may only be 24 pages, 28 pages, but it's a really good, solid read. But the other ones that really impress me are comics which tell a great story with barely any pages. One of the most memorable comic stories I've ever written, not written, I've read myself as a reader, was it's from an indie book, and it's from about maybe 10 years ago now, maybe even a bit longer. And it was a horror story, and it was a 1-page horror story. Yeah. And the story was about, as you were reading the story, it was done on like a 9-panel grid. So the classic kind of layout. And as you're reading the story, by the end of the fourth or fifth panel in the story, you kind of realize that the character in the story could see you, the reader, and was aware of what you were doing, is aware that you're watching him. And then it became quite meta. And then the guy then slowly realized that if you turned the page, that would be the end of his life. He'd be gone. He'd be finished. So he was then begging you not to turn the page. So the final panel on the page was this guy begging you not to turn the page. Because if he did turn the page, that's it. He'd be killed. He'd be dead. You'd know more. So by the very act of the reader turning the page, that kind of closed off the story. And it was a wonderful, wonderful example of how to tell a brilliant, clever story in just a page. But the other thing that was really impressive about that story, it was a story that could only work as a comic. The type of story that was, there was no way you could adapt that successfully to another medium, because it all relied on the character on that page in the story realizing he was in a comic. The reader then engaging and realizing that the character realized it was a comic. Then also the fate of the character being dependent on the reader who was reading the comic. Very clever stuff. And that was just done in one page. So I think that's a really good example of how a short story can be more effective than a much, much longer story. Because that's a story that I remember for years and years and years. And I've read thousands of comics since I read that story. But that's one I will always remember.
Yeah, to even go further into that, because one of the things that you do a lot of is you do a bunch of anthologies, and you do Bomb Scare, which is a big anthology, and a bunch of short stories, a little bit longer stories as well. And so, what is the story behind that? Because that's another one of Time Bomb's entire product lines, and there's 3 of them, if not 4 of them, at this point now that are out there. And so, talking about even anthologies and short stories and putting works out, and you've kickstarted all of this stuff too, which is even better. So, but people can pick this up on your website, and that's how I want to sort of let people know about it.
I mean, Kickstarter, as I think it's made a huge difference in how comics can now be promoted, and marketed and sold. I think it's been interesting to see how the Kickstarter platform has evolved over the past few years, and I think it will continue to evolve in quite fascinating ways. I think one of the things which has made a difference with how Time Bomb approaches Kickstarter is that we don't approach it as a all or nothing plea for funding, because before we started using Kickstarter, I mean, we only started using Kickstarter in 2015, so we'd already been publishing for 8 years before we turned to Kickstarter. The thing is, all the books we do through Kickstarter, we know they will be published. So we use Kickstarter as a pre-order, purely and simple. So we use it to kind of directly connect with people who are hopefully interested in the books that we put out. And we can reach people globally, and have that direct connection, which is something which you can't achieve if you in your books through say Diamond. We have used Diamond, but we've decided we get a better response rate, better engagement, better success by actually going direct. And I think with Kickstarter, you can just really target the people that really want to read your books, and it's great to be able to kind of get in touch with backers and hear from backers, the people who've actually read your comic, and get that instant feedback on what they think. And that's a real ace to be able to play for any creator or publisher. And the way we do it with Time Bomb is that our targets are always quite low. And the reason the targets are quite low is because we don't need to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, because we know the book's going to be published anyway. All we're doing is being able to provide an opportunity for people to pre-order and actually get the book for less than if they bought it after it was published, either through our own website or from a show or through our distributor. The price that anyone pays for the book they get through Kickstarter will always be the best price they can find it for. And part of the reason for that is that we also then make sure that we'll try and add in at least one stretch goal, hopefully more. And so for some of our more popular lines, like like the Flintlock books and Brawler, and the last Bomb Scares, people actually get in, the backers of the campaign effectively end up getting the book which they originally backed for free, because we put so much extra kind of content into their packages, which in terms of value, it far exceeds the amount of their original pledge anyway. And it's a great way of saying thank you to the people who were good enough to kind of back and put their money down before the book is actually released. But we also then tend to try our best to ensure that any book that is funded through Kickstarter or pre-ordered is published at most within 2 months of the Kickstarter closing.
So let's talk a little bit about this too, because I just funded on Kickstarter, and my goal was just to cover my expenditures for StreamYard and social media expenses, and that's why my goal was $750, because it's covering certain goals and the physical stuff that I'm pushing out, as well as my cost for StreamYard, and it's covering about 18 months out. And that was purposely because I'm not looking to make hundreds of thousands of dollars either. I'm looking just to break even because I have other methods of sponsorships. But sometimes sponsorships fall through. So that was my intention. I think that is a very different concept with Kickstarter, and people are using it as a business, because I'm almost using it like a pre-order form.
And I think that's a really great way to use it. And I think really it's whatever works for you. But I think what's really important is if you're doing it in a way that it is a pre-order platform, is actually being quite transparent about that, about the reason why you're doing that. I think that's just as important, because I think one of the key things about Kickstarter and the people who are successful with Kickstarter, and then these are the guys who've used it, for multiple campaigns, it's having that transparency with your backers throughout the project. So, and it doesn't necessarily, so keeping the backers informed. That's really important, especially on those instances where things suddenly, get derailed. Keeping your backers updated, keep them informed, let them know what's going on. Because I back a lot of projects myself on Kickstarter, because one thing I believe as well, that I can't really expect people to back any of my projects on Kickstarter if I've never backed anybody else's project on Kickstarter. So I'm always actively using Kickstarter myself as a backer. At the moment, I think I've backed about 550 odd different projects. So I really do back a lot of stuff on Kickstarter because I love the platform. I think it's great. But what I find as the backer, what frustrates me is when months and months and months go by and you don't hear anything at all from the creator of that project. That's such a frustration, and I think that's something which if someone has used Kickstarter for the first time and they experience that, they'll never go back to Kickstarter again. And I don't mind a project being late as long as I'm told that it's late. So I think that transparency with backers is such an important thing in that communication. It's not about sending someone an email every week. It's not necessarily about sending them an email every month to let them know what's going on. But it is about that regular contact to let people know what is going on and your progress. Because it's also about building up, I guess, a circle of trust with the people who have backed you. Because what you find is if you do multiple kind of campaigns, that you will get people coming back, familiar backers coming back and supporting you again. So every time you launch a new Kickstarter, because you fulfilled it in a fair way, because you've been communicative, and because they've been happy with what they received, they will come back. I said, the Rotten Under the Snow that's currently live now. That's my 19th campaign, but there's people on this campaign that have backed every single one of my previous campaigns. And so to have that kind of that trust from your audience, that's brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic. That's really meaningful. So it's about treating your backers with respect. That's one of the keys to kind of being successful on, I don't think, not just Kickstarter, but on any crowdfunding platform.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I can't speak. Well, I agree completely with that, where it's building trust, it's building, letting your backers know what's going on. And obviously, I'm in my first one and I'm slowly fulfilling, but I'm keeping people updated, saying, hey, this is where we're at. I started fulfillment before I even got the money. And I'm just reminding people, say, hey, fill out your form, please, And then I'm keeping people, and that's where we're going. And as my physical rewards are starting to go out and I need to order them, I can say, hey, I just placed the orders. I'm running 2 weeks late. I'm running 3 weeks late. Because I think people don't mind if a project's late, as you said, as long as you're saying, hey, there's a printing delay. There was a finance delay. The shipping, my president's doing my mail cards when I'm on vacation, they're a week out. So I think that's something that people really need, is saying, hey, this is where we're going. So I agree with everything you said on Kickstarter in that realm. This echo is not working well for me.
I think it's a great platform. I really do. And what's interesting, because it took me a while to come around to it, because when I first originally heard about Kickstarter, this would have been about 2010, 2011, maybe. I was very anti-Kickstarter because I just saw it as well. And this is just like begging, or this is just begging. And I remember I thought, I couldn't understand it. Why would you expect people to give you all this money in advance? What's all that about? It took me a while to kind of latch on and understand what it was all about. But as soon as the penny dropped, that was it. I thought, this is how it works. But more importantly, I realised this is how I could use it. And it's been a great tool. It really has.
Yeah, no, I love Kickstarter. I liked it as a backer, and it has been a very cool experience as now somebody who ran their first campaign. And I'm the first person to admit that there's a million things that I could have done better on my first Kickstarter. But it's also, you have to start somewhere and you have to jump into the pool. And I don't know people who back and listen to this show, because I have both people who are just backers and then people who run campaigns. And it is a very different entity being a backer than it is to be running a campaign. And so I have a new respect for everyone who runs a campaign at this point.
I mean, the thing is as well, you learn from every campaign. Obviously, you learn most from your first campaign. You really do. But every single campaign you will learn something from. And no campaign is the same. So, from a creative perspective, every campaign is different. So you can never predict it. You can maybe kind of shuffle the cards so they're slightly in your favor, but ultimately you can never predict it. And that's kind of part of the fun of it, really. I really think it's you learn a lot from every single one you do. But I think the other thing as well, which I think some people maybe don't take into account when they're running a campaign, is how you have to manage it really quite smartly for it to work. It's more than just kind of putting your page together, pressing the launch button and hoping for the best. It really is a lot more involved than that. And I think sometimes that catches people out when they're kind of doing their big first campaign, because it's not just the window of opportunity when your Kickstarter is live and running, which I know normally normally 30 days is the average, isn't it? But there's also the couple of weeks leading into the Kickstarter where you do your advanced promo. That's such a key thing to be able to do. But then also, more importantly, is the bit after the campaign, because the bit after the campaign, that will really define your success and your credibility on the platform. It's how you fulfilled, how you've communicated, the length of time it's taken, all those things that will happen after the Kickstarter closes. So the 30-day window of when your platform is live and you're tweeting and social media and doing all that kind of stuff to get backers onto your campaign page, that's such a small part of the campaign process. And I think you should always kind of be mindful of that. So a Kickstarter may only last 30 days, but the reality of it is more likely to last at least 60, more likely 90, perhaps even a bit longer.
I agree. So one of the things that I'm launching another campaign, and there is strategy going into what I'm going to be doing for promos, when I'm launching, what day I'm launching. There's a lot of stuff. There are national holidays that are called social media holidays, and I am launching on one of those holidays purposely because it fits into the theme of the campaign. And so you're launching on a Thursday at this time. Why? But there's a theory behind why I'm launching that position. And I think people don't understand there's multiple strategies that go into this. And it's also the idea that how do you write your Kickstarter, what words you use, what picture you use, do you use a video, not a video, and all sorts of stuff of that nature. So it's complicated. And that's the first thing I've learned on my Kickstarter is that I got notified legitly like 8 days before I was about to launch. And I got approved by Kickstarter, and then Christmas was coming. So with the entire podcast, I didn't have the luxury of as much promo time as I wanted. But I still got funded, but I hustled my ass off for it. Which is also the other thing that I think people don't understand is that you gotta hustle your ass off. Like you've seen people who their book isn't great, but they are everywhere and then they get funded. So that's something that people don't understand. Is you got to go the distance sometimes. And I pushed my little podcast and I pushed it like a cart before me. And that's the reason why I got funded because I kept going every single day.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing as well. It's not for the faint-hearted in terms of that in that regard. You've got to be prepared to promote. And there's a couple of times where I've had a conversation with people and they say, "Oh, I'm not sure because I don't want to kind of post about it every day because it'll upset some of my friends." Well, you know what? If your friends are the type of people that will get upset that you're trying to kind of promote your kind of your passion, your creative project, they're not get better friends. You know what I mean? Because you've got to promote. At the end of the day, with social media, anything you don't like, you can just scroll past. It's not a problem. So push, but use the groups. There's so many groups on certainly Facebook that you can kind of make use of, and are happy to accept posts about Kickstarter projects and other crowdfunding campaigns. Make full use of those, but push stuff out. But what I would also do, and this may sound a little bit contradictory, but it's not, is don't spam. And what I mean by that is whenever you push something out, by all means, post every day, but don't post exactly the same thing every day. The only thing that should really be the same every day when you post is your link for your project. But other than that, have a slightly different wording, have a different piece of art, have a different something, have a different kind of description, something. So it's always fresh, but constantly do it. Don't worry about.
So I have a system that I use where I go through a 4-day cycle in all the groups. So I'm part of about 70 groups. So I divide it by 4, 16, 15, 15, 16, essentially. So I'm posting only in 16 to 18 groups a day, but it's on a 3 or 4 day cycle, so I'm not completely there all the time. And I break it up purposely because a lot of people overlap in the groups, and that's what I do. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now you could post in all 70 groups with different things every single day, but I avoid spamming where I give the groups a little bit of breathing room to consume it and not piss off the admins. And that works for me because I'm still active. Because after 3 days, it gets buried with a bunch of other posts, and then it's fresh again, but it's the exact same wording. But it's fresh again, or I change the picture a little bit, and that works for me. And you can, however many groups you're at, or you can modify my strategy, but that helped tremendously.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good one. And I think as well, I mean, certainly what I do, taking into account the different time zones around the world, because it's a global platform. So it's no good always posting at say 5 o'clock in the afternoon, UK time, because people might not see that in the States. And if you post at midnight UK time, you'll get very the UK interest, but you'll get maybe US interest, or Canadian interest. So it's that regular posting, but also not posting at the same time. So structuring your kind of regular posts, so you're capturing the global audience at each of their individual peak times, and so it's factoring that into account. And you'll see anyway, although Kickstarter is global, you will notice that there's certain countries where you'll get more backers. So I mean, I live in the UK, but usually about 50% of my backers are UK. Sometimes it drops to about 45%, maybe even 40%, but it is still predominantly UK. The next big chunk is the US, followed then by Canada, Australia, and then countries across Europe. And of course, this is because the type of comics that I'm doing kind of appeal to the readers in those countries. So you identify who your audience are. I guess a handful of backers from a lot of the different European countries, and places like Thailand and the Philippines and Japan, but very little, because the books I produce, they're in English. So straight away there'll be people who won't be interested in what I'm doing, simply because it's printed in a language that they may not necessarily be comfortable reading or able to read. In the same way, how many French text graphic novels have you bought or back this year? Probably very few, unless you can read French. Same with the Japanese stuff. It's only really the translated stuff that we tend to read. So it works the same way, but factor all this into your planning and your scheduling. So you're hitting the audience that would likely be interested in what you're producing at the right time for them to get their interest.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've sort of lived it, so I now understand it a lot more than I did before, and I'm launching another campaign a lot sooner than people realize, and I'm planning it out little by little on exactly what I'm going to be doing. But I do want to shift outside of the strategic side of Kickstarter, and I want to talk about your latest project that you're putting out there, which is Rotting Under the Snow. So what is the basic premise of this comic? Because it's on Kickstarter, and you're doing pretty good with it lately.
Yeah, it's a great little project, and it's very much kind of a project which is kind of epitomizes a lot of what Time is all about. I mean, it's a 96-page original graphic novel, and it's going to be presented in an A4 format, which is a larger size than the standard kind of comic book size. So it's a nice oversized kind of chunky read, and it's a story of a night witch in World War II, and for those who aren't familiar with who night witches were, they were female Russian fighter pilots, and what they used to do, they used to kind of go up in their dilapidated kind of planes, and they used to fly over Nazi Germany. But as they approached Germany and the targets, they would cut their engines so they couldn't be heard, and that's when they would drop their bombs. And then once their bombing raid had finished, then they would try and restart their engines to get home. And I say try because the aircraft they were using, they weren't the best maintained. So a lot of the time, they wouldn't be able to start their engines. And obviously, if you're that high up in the air and you've got a plane and the engine doesn't start, there's only going to be one eventual outcome to your flight. So they became known as the night witches because people couldn't hear them approach, but of course they would cause kind of destruction because the bombs that they've got. It's a fascinating story about the night witches. It's well worth kind of independently having a read about them and what they got up to in World War II. But so the lead character in Rotten and Snow is a night witch, and it's a horror story. It's a horror story set in Leningrad. It features the story of a night witch and the horrors she encounters. And there's a touch of horror. There's also then a touch of science fiction there as well. It's very kind of cleverly done. The lead character is a night witch. The other lead character is also female. It's written. The story is written by a writer called Katie Cunningham, and Mike Bogdanovich is Eastern European, and he's the line art. The colouring has been done by Daniel Weber. The lettering has been done by a guy called Aaron Rackley. And these are all creators who are very, very talented, but it is the first time they've worked on anything more than a short story. So it's the first kind of long form kind of project they've worked on. So it came basically I pulled the creative team together because it originally started as an on spec pitch from KT. So it came in initially as a proposal, as a written proposal. I liked it so much that I decided I knew that I'd like to see it kind of realised as a finished book, and then went through our submissions kind of pile to find an artist which I thought would be suitable, and that's how I found Mike. And then we brought in Danielle and Aaron, and they've all been working together on this book, and it's a really nice piece of work. It's a really nice solid piece of work. It's beautifully written. It's generally horrific in places, but it also treats the source material with respect. And I think that's important for any kind of book that has a kind of a real world setting, especially when there's a kind of something like the Second World War, which obviously kind of transformed the whole world thereafter. So yes, it's about just over halfway through. It's a pre-order window on Kickstarter. I think there's 14 days left. It's just unlocked its second stretch goal, and hopefully it will be able to unlock a third one before it's done. And as with all our Kickstarters, every person that backs will get something extra at the end if all the stretch goals are unlocked. Hopefully they will. I'm hoping they will. But the plan is for every backer to receive something on top of the book that they backed for in the first place. It's a lovely piece of work. Please, if you can, it'd be great. If anyone want to check it out, please do.
Yeah, and let's even talk a little bit about this because this is obviously dealing with World War II. It's from a Russian perspective, not a U.S., not a UK position. And so what is that like? Because these stories don't get told in comics. I think there's only one other person I know who does a story sort of about Russian fighter pilots. And so what is that kind of like? Because it's hitting a niche that is not explored all that often.
Well, kind of. It's an interesting one because, of course, because I'm coming from a British perspective here, and we've regularly had in the comics that have been published in the UK, stories that actually feature characters who are the goodies as opposed to being the baddies. So one of the kind of most fondly remembered comics of the 1970s was a weekly comic called Action, which didn't last too long because it ended up being banned because it was considered far too subversive for the British children of the 1970s. But it had a story in there called Hellman of Force, which was about a story of a German tank commander. So it was war stories featuring the German tank commander as the hero, fighting the Allied troops. So that was the perspective of that story. So it's something which we've seen in the past in British comics, and I know it's kind of unusual. I know you normally have with war stories, it's stories of the GIs or the Marines or the Tommies and all that kind of stuff. It's the stories of the guys who won the war, but it's also I think the stories of the people who lost. Sometimes they can be far more interesting, I think, because also I think if you're telling the story of someone who was on the losing side, you don't really then know how the story will end. You kind of know that if the story features kind of a heroic kind of Allied soldier, the chances are that the story will end with some kind of victory for that Allied soldier. Whereas if it's for the other side, as it were, then you're not really 100% sure how that story is going to end because it's not really an area you may be familiar with kind of reading about. But I think I think one of the things about Rotten Under the Snow is that what comes across as you're reading this story quite early on, it becomes less about the Russians and the fact that they're Russian, but more about the humanity involved. And one thing as well, regarding World War II, the Russians were also fighting the Nazis as well. So the Russians were fighting the Germans, the Americans were fighting the Germans, and the British were fighting, and so many others were fighting the Germans. It was only really after the Second World War when the whole kind of Soviet thing, and then suddenly, Russia was the enemy. During World War II, they were fighting the Nazis as well. So it's an interesting kind of setting because it is a setting that you don't normally see. And I think the way that Katie's written the story and her characterization of Kajana the Night Witch and the other characters in the story, it's very I don't know, it's a very human story. It's very cleverly done. I think she'll produce more great things. I think because there's a real kind of she reminds me a bit like Gail Simone, because Gail Simone can write really kind of like traditional kind of comics, but there's something more to them. And I think sometimes it's because she's come out with a female perspective. And Katie, I think Katie's the same. So she can write stories which are real kind of like solid adventure stories, and this was a war story. But there's something else to it that I think perhaps a male writer couldn't have brought to that story, just because of the different perspectives, I think.
No, I feel you on that in a lot of ways. So, and I get it completely where sometimes a woman writer can write a certain story a certain way that a male writer can't, and vice versa. But I don't want to get into all those politics and get you or me canceled today. So that's not happening today. That's tomorrow's episode. But anyway, I do want to talk about rewards because you have a bunch of them. You got the digital, you got the print plus edition. I think there's like a digital, plus edition. There's a limited book plate edition, and then there's like a celebration digital or physical plus package of all of everything that you offer. And so, what is this like? Because you offer enough variety, but you don't overburden a Kickstarter. Because you've seen it and I've seen it where people have 100 tiers. And I'm like, that's a little too much. Maybe one less and you'll be perfect,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's people like to have a bit of choice. And And of course, the tiers that we have are pretty much based on the experience of the past of what I can see that people have responded to and have worked well. Um, they always have this thing called a printed plus, and the idea behind the printed plus is that it doesn't cost much more than the actual basic book. It's about it's usually £5 more, which is about $6-7, I think. $7 more than the actual basic kind of print pledge, but there's the opportunity within that to get a print which isn't available anywhere else, which is produced just for that reward tier. What we also do that every single other stretch goal that we may unlock will go into that reward tier automatically. Now, sometimes in the past we've managed to unlock 7, 8, 9 different stretch goals. So all those have gone into that kind of printed plus tier. So it's a real kind of a great package. So basically, if someone wants to spend a little bit more than just that basic book, it's not too much more, because I think that's the thing. It's not gouging people for cash. It's saying, well, if you want to kind of just put in a little bit more, you'll potentially get a lot back. So that tends to be quite a kind of popular pledge reward that we regularly have a variation of. The book plates are also popular because they're limited. There are limited rewards, so we normally do only between 20 and 25 of the book plates, and those book plates are produced again just for the campaign. They're signed and numbered. They're only available as part of the campaign. We don't have them anywhere else. So literally they're printed toward. To be honest, we get a couple more printing just in case things go missing and stuff. But they're printed toward. We don't sell them on. But for that, we automatically include the printed plus pledge anyway. So again, the increment between the printed plus reward and then the book plate is small. It's not a huge amount. It gives people that option. What we've done for this campaign, and we'll be doing with the campaigns throughout this year, is purely because it's our 15 years of publishing, and we're aware that there's still a lot of people who probably have never read any of our books before. So the idea with the celebration package is that people who want to like the idea of Rotten Under the Snow, because it's complete. The celebration package includes another 6 books from the books we published in the past, all which we know people really like. So there's an opportunity to get 6, 7 books in one package, and they're all kind of either complete stories or they're the first part. So there's split off book 1 in there. There's the first border in there, and there's some other titles which are self-contained. So it's a real good introduction to Time Bomb, and the titles that we know are popular. It's not just the stuff we've got left lying over and we want to get rid of. It is our key stuff which we use. So we have those multiple kind of options there, and in digital and print. And then I think for this, so now again we have some original art rewards. I think for Rotten and Stone we just have the one original art reward. Again, it's having that kind of limited reward available. So if someone wants to kind of drop a bit more and get something really exclusive, then they can. But I agree with you. It's not about just overloading the choice, because sometimes it's like and you think, where's this going to end? So we tend not to do things like, we very rarely do things like variant covers for that reason. The only book we do variant covers for is the Brawler book. We don't do variants for any of the other books we do, because with Brawler we only do one variant, and rather than having multiple ones, so we don't do it. We don't do any of some of the things. We don't bother with things like new covers and all that kind of crap. We don't bother with any of that crap. We just kind of, really what we want is people to read the book. So at the end of the day, if people just want to read the basic book, there's a basic digital pledge and there's a basic printed pledge, and they can read the book. But we try and structure each one so even those backers will get something else beyond their initial, pledge for just the book. They'll get something else. That's how we try and structure it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm going to be very honest. I hate when I get decimated on a Kickstarter and They're just trying to like squeeze every drop of money out of me. And it is complicated, especially when like a regular book's like 20 bucks already, and then a variant's like 50. And there gets a point where it's just too much. And I think there is a fine line where you're now crossing that. And I don't think you do that. I tried not to do that on my campaign for that very reason, because while I do want to be funded, I do not want to drain my backers completely out. And because if I run another campaign in 3 months, what happens if I burn you out of money in the first 3 months and it takes you 6 months to recover for what I did? It's just bad business. It's I want people to come back saying, "Oh, I paid 20 bucks, I got $30 worth of value."
Yeah,
So that's kind of how
exactly
I
right.
function.
I think, I think as well, the other thing is with things like postage. Now, we do free postage to everyone in the UK as a standard thing. So, everyone in the UK is free postage. It's UK address, they don't pay any postage on top. We'll cover that. With international, we can't cover it because it's too wide. It's too huge. But what we do try and do is have it as low as we can possibly do it for it to be fair. So we do postage at cost. So we find out and that's how we work out postage elements. So I think for Broughton and the Snow, I think if you're in the States, I think it works out an extra $8. I think it works about $8 postage to get the book. So you're getting a book which would normally retail for $25 with I think $8 postage, and that's the reason which we think is fair. So that's how. I mean, and bear in mind that the book itself will cost you about through the Kickstarter about $17, $18. So you're already so we're trying to offset what the actual retail price book would be against postage for stuff like that. That's how we try. That's how we try and work it. Because I think one of the things as well, which is kind of frustrating for me, because I back a lot of projects, and I would back a lot more. Certainly, it runs in the US if the postage wasn't so insane for some of them. Now I know it costs more like the post from the States than the UK. I know it costs a bit more, but sometimes when you see some. Yeah, when you see something that they've got like a standard 32-page comic book, and they're trying to slap a $40, $50 postage add on for it, it's ridiculous. And they, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to back someone like that. It's just not going to happen. I mean, if it works out at about $10, then fine. I don't mind paying postage about $10 for a standard book if it's a book I'm really excited about. But I think that's one of the things that is disappointing, because I'd love to back more on Kickstarter, certainly from stuff from the States. Because a lot of it looks absolutely brilliant. But I don't want to pay 3, 4, 5, 10 times as much to get a book from Kickstarter just because the postage is so crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree. In which that I stopped backing a friend of mine's book from Canada because it's $21 to $25 of shipping, and I'm already spending $45 for your package, and $25 more puts me at $70. And he sends me the book, and it's like $22 to ship it to the States. So it's not like he's ripping me off, but it's just too expensive for me. And I won't back something from Australia. I don't back books from the UK because I might back it digitally, but I'm not going to back a physical book. And if your digital book is $15, no thank you at that point either. Because that's the other thing, is that you got to keep your digital book like $6 is where I'm at. Even if it's a 60 or 80-page book, $6 digitally is where I'm at. And so that's kind of my whole thing. So it's unfortunate. And there's a reason on my Kickstarter I did not ship international. I refused to ship international on my first one because there's just not enough money. But also, most of my digital rewards are open to the world. Obviously, you're in the UK, I'm in the US, it's international. I interviewed Morgan Quaid from Australia. I have a few more people, I think, from Australia that are going to be coming on, and there's a lot more people coming around from all over the world. So I can do digital international because I could speak to anybody through Skype, StreamYard, Zoom in that fashion, but I'm not going to go send a postcard to the UK. It's just too expensive for me to do that. But I digress. So I do want to give you a chance to promote yourself because you got a lot going on with Time Bomb. You got the Kickstarter going on. You got a bunch of comics for sale. You're doing a bunch of cons, and you got a bunch of other campaigns coming up this year. So, floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks very much. To be honest, we've probably covered a lot of it already. The Rotten and the Snow is live now, so that's where my kind of focus is in terms of the promotion. Which is live on Kickstarter. Which finishes on the first of March. That finishes, so still time to kind of check that out, get behind that. This year we're looking at probably doing a new pre-order campaign once every 2 months. So because we've got a lot on our plate this year because it's our 15th anniversary year, and we're kind of catching up from the past couple of years where we kind of scaled back our publishing plan slightly because of the lockdowns and because of COVID. So this year we've got Flintlock Book 6 coming out. We've got a Brawler 3 coming out. We should have another Bomb Scares coming out. We've got a book coming out called Spectrum, which is going to be the next one after Under the Snow. So there'll be some announcements about that soon. And that'll be our first licensed title as well. I can't really say too much about it at the moment because it was officially announced. I'm quite excited about that because it is, I've been thinking about doing a licensed title for a few years, but I wanted it to be, I didn't want it to be some kind of game that nobody's heard of or a TV series that only lasted one season. I wanted it to be something that's known, and it is known. It's worldwide known. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how that's received when it's announced. And hopefully we should be announcing that, if not by the end of this month, certainly the early part of March. We got Harker, more Harker coming out. Harker is our crime series, which is in a really nice, again, 68-page format, full color, and each story is split across 2 volumes. So we've got part 2 of the Black Hound coming out later this year. The first Black Hound story, part 1, Harker Black Hound part 1, has literally just been published. It's being sent out to Kickstarter backers as I speak. So the fulfillment of that is underway. So that's in hand. We got lots of stuff going on. Shows are back, so looking forward to that. I'm off to Scotland at the start of April for the Glasgow Comic Con, and then over the course of the year, I'm at London, I'm at Portsmouth, Bristol, Edinburgh, all over the all over the UK, where I'm doing some shows. I'm also doing some play past the UK, where I haven't really got to before. Places that are a bit out of the way in the UK, which always seems a bit strange when I'm saying that, because I know Britain is so small compared to some of the states. So it's kind of, when I say things like are out of the way, it's kind of like you've got to think, what are you talking about? We go that distance to do our shopping, but it's a different mindset in the UK. Some of these places, the idea of driving more than 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours to be somewhere, that's considered a bit of a holiday in the UK, as opposed to a little trip up the road. So I'll be doing some things like that, and there's just lots going on, and all our books are available through our website at timebombcomics.com. We've got an online store there. We've got social media pages. I can be found quite easily on social media, so anyone wants to kind of directly connect with me, more than happy to do that. And of course, Time Bomb has an open submissions policy as well, so we're always happy to look at submissions that come in from outside. Rotten Under the Snow started as a commission that came, was announced that commissioner came in. So the submissions door does work. All I would say, anyone who is interested in submitting something to read our submission guidelines, please. They're on the Time Bomb website. They're very clear. They're very straightforward. Please read them. Please follow them. We get so many submissions every week. A huge percentage don't match our guidelines, so they're kind of deleted straight away. We don't even bother reading them. But please follow our guidelines. Then we'll read them. If we like them, we'll get back to you. Even if we don't like them, we'll get back to you and let you know the reason why, or maybe suggest other places which may be more interested in the kind of stuff that you're doing. But otherwise, just enjoy comics. Comics are great. Enjoy comics. They're brilliant.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna add to that you have to support indie comics, everybody. And the way you do that is backing Kickstarters, buying independent comic creators, buying stuff off of websites, and backing Kickstarters, as already stated, because this is how more books get produced, more stories get produced, and stories continue, is through you, the customer support of said product. So that is very important. And then going further off of that, I get money's tight with people. I'm a little bit in that where my money's a bit tight, but I do share out as many projects as I possibly can because I do have a fan base and I recommend books and comics to people who are looking for new projects. So that's another thing that you should be doing. If you can't monetarily support a comic, you should be sharing it out because that's just as important. So I recommend everybody doing that. And that's kind of all I have to say on that point. So I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, I think you could have really well. Supporting indie comics, and it is every like, every share. That's just as meaningful as someone actually spending money. It's probably more meaningful because it means that you're spreading news of that project far and wide. But also be kind. There's a lot going on in the world today. I know we've just come out of this pandemic and all that kind of stuff. We've come out of this really strange period in international politics and stuff, which is still going on. Just be kind. Enjoy comics. Enjoy each other, really.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said that better myself. And that is a wrap, everybody.